day 6 of the 12 Days of Birth Stories. Today, Brittany is going to share her story with us about her emergency C-section with one of her kiddos, and I'm excited to explore that topic with her. Now, if you really like these stories and you feel like being generous or supporting the project, I have a link in my bio where you can buy me a coffee. And what that does is it supports the work that I do, and it allows me to continue to offer these things in the future. I had a beautiful morning this morning with my radical mamas. We gathered at one of the mamas' houses and we had a potluck. And they were talking about some of your stories and sharing how they impacted them. And it was really cool to see, again, some of this stuff play out in real life. So if you're here telling your story, know that it is impactful. And if you want to tell your story in the future, there might be another chance to do that together, because I think it's so important to have the space to tell your story. It really helps you put the pieces together. Yesterday, we had Bonnie on, and unfortunately, Instagram went down pretty much immediately after our chat. So I'm not sure if her live saved, but one of Bonnie's messages was that you can do it. You know, she had a VBAC after having 2 cesareans, and that was one of her very important messages was, you know, sometimes we have cesarean births, but sometimes we can also rewrite, reframe, have that redemption birth experience and make it happen. So very, very good conversation. And if Bonnie's live doesn't save, then we're going to bring back Bonnie if she's available to just talk about that message and share some empowering thoughts and feelings on her journey and encourage you guys to follow your vision of what birth looks like. And I think this week we're gonna start to see that it doesn't always go according to the vision, and like, how do you roll with that? How do you let go of expectations, and how do you surrender to the birthing process? So I'm excited to watch that play out. Okay, we're just gonna wait for Brittany to join. I'm gonna see if I can like add her this way. You know, pray to the internet gods and goddesses and the technology gods and goddesses, and we're gonna ask for a supportive journey today so that we have no issues. So let's try and there we go. We're gonna go live with Brittany in a second here once everything clicks, and I'm just gonna plug in my phone. Yes. Okay, I can see something. There we go.
Hey.
Hey, how are you?
How are you?
Good. Good. I was just sharing that I just came from our radical gathering where we had our potluck, so it was a very nice morning. You what did you say? Sorry?
Oh, I was just saying, how was it?
Oh yeah, it was really, really good. I mean, it's always too short. We always want more time with each other, and it's always delicious. My favorite one.
I love that. Good food is always good in my mind. So
That's the spice of life, right? Like the little simple things are like the best parts.
yeah.
So do you want to introduce yourself, Brittany, and tell us how many kiddos you have and what you want to talk about today?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Brittany, of course. I have 2 kids. I have a daughter, Ruby June. She's 5.5, and I have a son, Grant, who will actually be 2 this month. So
Wow.
here today, I think mostly we're going to be talking about my first birth of my daughter, which was my emergency C-section, and focusing more on that. It was more eventful than my birth with my son. Thankfully, my birth with my son was uneventful. So, yeah.
Okay. So do you want to talk about maybe what were your plans or thoughts and feelings or vision? What was your idea of how your birth experience was, hopefully going to go with her?
Yeah, okay. So we definitely had a birth plan. After going through what we went through, I really like to refer to them when I'm talking to my doula clients as birth preferences, because of course you can have a plan if you'd like, but chances are it's not going to go exactly to that. And that was true in my case. In fact, pretty much everything that I didn't want to happen did.
Okay.
So we did take the birth classes, the birth prep classes, where they put you through, oh, what do you want your birth to look like? I was very much, I want to labor naturally. I don't want any medical intervention. I don't want any pain medication. I definitely do not want a cesarean. That was a no, avoid at all costs unless an absolute emergency. So yeah, I feel like I went in with a plan, but also I went in not really having any preparation as far as I just went in like, I'm going to have a baby. People have babies every day, and I'm going to the hospital and they know what they're doing, and I don't have to worry because this is just something that's natural. And in that sense, didn't really prepare myself for what I was about to go into. So
did they like, so in your childbirth classes, and was this before you became a doula as well? Just to contextualize that.
Yeah, this is before I became a doula. It wasn't until after this experience of my emergency C-section that I really started to like dive into pregnancy and childbirth and just became obsessed with it all, and then found out about doulas. So this was long before I was a doula, for sure.
Which often happens for us, right? I had a traumatic birth experience, and then I had a magical home birth and was like, I want to help women do this instead. So a lot of us walk that path. Okay, so in your childbirth classes, did they talk about interventions? Did they talk about emergencies, or you just kind of tune that part out? What do you remember?
They did talk about that. Yeah, they did talk about that. They talked about, of course, oh, well, if you want an epidural for your pain management. I was actually doing a podcast earlier this week where they were saying, did they talk about like comfort measures and things that you can do to help with the pain? Which no, they didn't. They talked about all of the medicinal interventions that could happen, right? They didn't talk about, oh, well, what about counter pressure or massage or anything like that. It was more, you're going into the hospital and these are the things that the doctors can do to keep you comfortable. So of course we went over what a cesarean would look like, which they showed us like a cartoon animation of cutting through all the layers. Yeah. And I just remember being like, oh, like, no, I can't do that. No way. And it was just this cartoon. So I just remember writing on my sheet, like, no cesarean, that is not happening. I am not doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how like the preparation for birth and like, yeah, like what tools are there available for us and what kind of conversations are we having, like, and the cartoon version versus, what does it really look like? What are those layers? Because we were talking yesterday about recovering from a C-section, like it's major abdominal surgery, and starting to wrap our heads around, well, what does that mean? Because I feel like we've even like, it's just words that we say. It's like, we're still not getting it. Like, it's major surgery and in an emergency, which you're going to talk about. And I'm curious to see how you recovered, but it's really hard on the body when it's a proper emergency that has to, get baby out quick. So, it's very interesting, that preparation piece around that. Okay, so you didn't want a C-section. So tell us what, I guess, like leading up to your birth, how did it start, and how are you feeling, and what happened next?
Yeah, for sure. I owned a cleaning business at that time. So I worked every day up until I went into labor. I actually had just a short 2-hour clean that day. And I remember in the middle of it needing to lay down on the couch and like take a little nap, like a little rest. And I thought, this is really strange. Like, I don't know. This is just a 2-hour clean. I should be fine. And then I went home and had a nap again and woke up and we ate some dinner. And then I started having some cramping. But of course, like, if you haven't gone through labor, if you haven't gone into labor, if you don't have people to speak to say, is this what it looks like? Is this what it feels like? You're kind of just questioning the whole time. So I was like, well, I guess we'll start timing these cramps and see if anything comes of it. And of course, they were quite regular. So I was like, okay, well, let's just see how this goes. I really wanted to stay at home as long as possible because I knew the quicker I got to the hospital, the more chance for intervention. So I just wanted to stay at home. But like I said, I didn't prepare myself. I feel like a lot of labor is a mental game, and mentally, I hadn't prepared at all. Physically, I had kept my body in shape. I had kept working. Physically, I felt good, but mentally, I wasn't strong. So basically, I thought that I was progressing very rapidly. I knew that that existed. I didn't know the name for it at that time, but I was like, sometimes this happens that like people only labor for like 2 hours and they have a baby. And I was like, that must be what's happening because this is just far too much pain and I'm not getting a break. And like, we need to go to the hospital like right now. And at the time we lived in Peterborough and I was delivering in Port Perry. So about 45-minute drive. So we're like, let's get going. Showed up there and I was 2 centimeters.
Yeah.
That's it. So they of course sent me home because they knew of my wish to do things naturally and they were very supportive. I love Port Perry Hospital. That's where I had both of my babies. So they sent me home. They said, you need to go labor at home. Come back in a few hours if it's still progressing. If it's too much for you to handle, then come back. So we did drive all the way back home in a rainstorm, the worst weather possible. And I labored more at home, but I just couldn't seem to take my breaks in between contractions.
Yeah.
I just kept, as soon as it would end, I was worried about the next one. I was like, that was really painful. And I know there's another one coming. And I didn't have the strength in my mind to just say, this is my rest. This is when I need to be just breathing and relaxing. I shouldn't be worried about what's coming. I just need to be enjoying this moment of just rest. So it was difficult. It was a difficult labor. My partner didn't really know how to support me. It's not something we really talked about beforehand. And when I was in it, I didn't know what to tell him for how I wanted to be supported because I was just in pain. And I was just in pain and I was overwhelmed and I didn't know how to handle it myself. So of course I couldn't think of anything to tell him. I just felt very overwhelmed with the whole situation. And we did end up going back to the hospital just a few hours later. And when we got there, I was only 4 centimeters dilated at that time. So.
Oh, wow. So still early, but feeling like overwhelmed by the process.
Yeah. For sure. I learned that she was sunny side up. So I had a lot of back labor and it was on top of each other. I couldn't really get that much break. I'm sure that the breaks were there, but in my mind, because I didn't know how to handle contractions and the ebbs and flows of the sensations I was feeling, I didn't have a break in my mind. It was just on top of it, one on top of the other. So basically, shortly after we got there for the second time, I asked for an epidural pretty much right away.
Yeah.
So that was I blamed myself for a long time for getting the epidural, that led to me needing to have an emergency cesarean because once I got the epidural, I just laid in bed and I slept. I don't even know for how long. There was no, let's get you sitting up, or let's try to move you to a different position, or let's help you, like assist you to stand up. Of course, I had an epidural, so I'm not going to have a huge range of motion on my own. But like we know, you can get support from nurses and your partner to be changing positions even with an epidural. But unfortunately, that just wasn't offered.
Do you want to talk about what that can look like so that people know? Because I feel like that would be amazing education to be like, okay, if you do engage with this epidural, you're limited, your mobility is limited. So like some people are told about a walking epidural, but we don't really have that option here in Ontario. So when you have an epidural, you are pretty much bedbound for most people. And then do you want to talk about what the options are for how to change positions and what you would have liked, like looking back?
Yeah, for sure. I was very reclined when I was sleeping. So even like putting the bed up into a sitting position is always helpful just to help with that gravity. And then with assistance from nurses and partners, of course, or doulas, if you have a wonderful doula that's helping you, which I didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Even getting up on all fours is possible because they can support your body. You still can obviously use your hands. You can get up over the top of the bed if you have the bed up. You can kind of support yourself with your arms on the top of the bed so that you're on your knees. I mean, there's lots of positions and ways that you can move around that are possible if you have that guided support, if you know what is actually possible with an epidural. Like you said, we don't have the walking epidurals, which is really unfortunate, to be honest. I mean, I don't know why that's not an option here, but maybe it's something that will come in the future with more awareness about the possibilities, right? And more people talking about what they want in their birth.
Yeah, for sure. And like what I notice is that, and it's come up in some of these stories too, is that the medication affects people differently. So the risk is like you're gonna fall off the side of the bed. Your legs, you can't feel them, and like the lower half, you can't feel them. Some women have more mobility than others and can move their legs a little bit, but the idea is that you can't. So yeah, having someone, oftentimes if you have a doula, there's doula on one side, partner on the other, or doula and nurse, so that you can make those transitions. And then some hospitals have like wedges that they'll stick under to like prop you up, or the peanut ball. There's different theories on whether those, peanut ball is supportive or not, but that's kind of that's the typical experience in our hospital system that you see happen. And then it's kind of like a wait.
Yeah.
How would you describe the next chunk of your experience? So lots of rest.
Yeah, lots of rest. I don't even know for how long, because I just slept. I pretty much just slept. I was so tired. I was like, this is lovely. I'm not in pain anymore. I can just sleep, and they're just going to let me know how I'm progressing. When it's time to push, they'll let me know how to do that. Like I said, I just had so much trust in the medical system. I've never had any reason to doubt them in my whole life. So I was just like, I'm here. They know what they're doing. They're going to sort it out. Everything's going to be fine. And then I ended up progressing to 7 or 8 centimeters. Depends on who you ask that did the cervical exams. But after that, I kind of stalled for a bit, which sometimes does happen in labors, that they get to that point before transition. And there's this little bit of stall so you can have a rest so that you're ready for the rest of your labor. But they, of course, saw that as a failure to progress.
Right.
And then they started getting a little bit in my ear about the cesarean and the potential for that. So I kind of, like you said, epidurals affect everybody differently. It affected me pretty harshly. I wasn't quite there. Like I was out of it. I was on a different planet. Like I felt like I had been given all of these drugs that just made me feel not present and not able to make decisions properly. I was just like, whatever we need to do, that's what we're going to do. You just let me know.
Yeah.
You just let me know going from here. So they did let me wait for a bit. And then they came in and did some testing on baby. Like they did some tickling of the scalp and went in there and tried to, because it said my daughter's heartbeat was remaining very steady.
Okay.
It wasn't going with the contractions as it should. It wasn't fluctuating in any way. So they did some tests to see if they could get her heart rate to be moving a little bit more, which she didn't really respond well to. So then at that point is when they deemed it an emergency and said, well, we're going to take you in to have a C-section now. We're worried about her activity. Okay. And it's time to kind of get her out of there. So I was just like, sure, let's do that. I just want my baby to be safe. So like wheel me in. Let's get this baby out of here. So that's kind of how it went from just me laboring and then letting me do it to like, oh, all of a sudden this is like an emergency and we need to get you in there right away. So.
Okay. So what happened next? What was the what was the tone like in the room, and how did things shift and change?
I was so out of it that I don't really remember too much about leaving that room and going into the operating room. I remember thinking it was so strange that they had to strap my arms down. And I was like, why do that? Like, there's a big sheet. I'm not grabbing for anything. Like, I'm good. I found it so strange that they had to do that. And I remember them saying, please let us know if you're feeling nauseous because we have anti-nausea medication we'll administer through your IV. And me just being the person I am, even though I did feel nauseous, I was like, I'm good. I've got this. I'm not going to say anything, which of course, like, you can't control it when you're in that state. If you're feeling nauseous, you're going to be sick, and they're doing abdominal surgery. They don't want you to be throwing up, which makes sense.
That'd be complicated.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember being strapped down on the table and like puking into this little thing they had beside my head, and they're like, you have to tell us when you're feeling nauseous. I was like, well, I'm not feeling good. I'm not feeling good at all. So I remember that, and just being like, what is even happening right now? Like, this is so far from where I thought I would be. And just feeling like I didn't have any control over anything. I didn't have control over the situation, how my birth was unfolding. I didn't have any control over what my body was doing, because I was like, oh, I won't be sick. I'm fine. But I couldn't control it. And that was a little bit weird for me. Of course, you're numb, so you can't feel anything painful, but you can still feel pressure. You can still feel like the pulling and the tugging. It's a very, very strange sensation. It was very, I don't want to say scary, but it was just something I was totally unfamiliar with. Up until then, I had never had any surgeries. I'd never even had a tooth pulled. Like, this was the first thing medically big that was happening to me. And it was all just in such a rush and such a daze. And there was no, like, they weren't explaining what was happening. I don't know if I would have liked to know what they were doing exactly. But I remember them doing the surgery and feeling all of the pulling. And then I remember they took out my daughter and put her above the sheet, which thank goodness my partner took a picture of her. I sent to you, because I wouldn't remember. I wouldn't have remembered what it looked like. But thank goodness he snapped this quick picture. And I remember them all singing happy birthday, which was so sweet. But then nothing. I passed out at that point. Yeah. So I didn't see my daughter for, I think it was about 4 hours. I was in recovery after the cesarean. They said that I had postpartum hemorrhaging and I lost a very, very, very large quantity of blood. I ended up needing 2 blood transfusions and an iron transfusion.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was pretty scary stuff. When I was in it, of course, I was just thinking, like, this must be what happens after a C-section. You just go to recovery and you need all of these things and you need a warming blanket and you're hooked up to 50,000 different IVs and monitors, and this just must be what recovery looks like. I didn't at the time think that my life had been in danger at a point. Until afterwards when I started really diving into things. And at that point, then I was like, okay, this was actually a pretty scary situation that I was in. And it took me a lot of time to unpack that and deal with the trauma from that birth.
Wow. Sorry, this cat wants attention, but I feel like both my animals came up when you were sharing that part of the story. So they're in tune with the energy.
Yeah, they're showing their love. My cat's sleeping, so.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think that hits the nail on the head for what that, I mean, your experience is not common, I would say, hopefully, because that sounds very life-threatening and sounded like touch and go. But what is common, I think, is not letting moms in on what's happening and what to expect in recovery. And so did they tell you in the recovery room what had happened to you when you woke up, or you just figured it out on your own?
Yeah, no, they actually didn't tell me what happened. The only thing they were really talking to me about was that my mom really wanted to come in and see me because she was waiting at the hospital when I told them that I went into labor. And it obviously had been a really long time. And then they were asking me if I was ready to breastfeed my daughter,
Wow.
which I was like, no. How can I possibly breastfeed? I've never done it before. I don't have any strength. I can't even lift my arms. I'm hooked up to so many things. It was never brought forth like, do you want us to bring in your daughter and support you to breastfeed? Which would have been different than asking if I was ready to do it.
Very differently.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure. And breastfeeding was a really important thing to me. It was in my birth plan. I want to do the golden hour and skin to skin, and I want to initiate a great breastfeeding relationship right off the hop. But they did end up giving my daughter formula because apparently she was just screaming and starving, and which, I mean, a few hours after birth, babies don't always need food. They're usually okay. And I really wish they would have said, okay, well, she's really struggling right now. We would love to bring her in and hold her for you and let her breastfeed. I would have been like, that sounds great. But when they approached me with, are you ready to do it? I was like, no, how can I? I don't even know where I am or what's going on. I feel so cold and weak, and I don't know how I could possibly hold a baby right now, let alone try to breastfeed them. Which thankfully for us, it didn't really impact our breastfeeding relationship negatively. We went on to breastfeed for 3.5 years, but that's not always the case. I mean, a lot of moms and babies that are separated at birth that want that and don't get that initial breastfeeding, it's a really big struggle for them to initiate that properly and have a successful breastfeeding relationship. So I feel like if that's something that's important, that's something that really needs to be followed through with if that's important for the family.
And that step-by-step process of, okay, they obviously knew what happened in the OR. So they should have brought you up to speed in some kind of gentle way. Like, hey, you've just been through something really big. Even if they said that, like, things didn't go as planned. Most women don't pass out. We had to do some things. Like, you're on the mend now. We're going to bring the baby in and we're just going to help you hold her, and don't, anything like that, I feel like would have been very different than putting it all on you. And like that pressure, I don't know if it was like a conscious thing at the time. You can speak on that, but that pressure of being the life support, like, hey, they're asking you to breastfeed. You're the person who wanted to provide that life-giving stuff to her. Didn't want formula, but then also just to hold a baby is like, if you drop them, they're resilient. But you're going to be dropping babies. So that's a lot of pressure to like, just to hold her, let alone to hold her and also feed her after something wildly traumatic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it was like, I didn't really comment on how I found out about what had happened. I requested my medical records, which I had to pay a huge amount for because they charge you per page.
Okay, wait. You have to pay for that?
Yeah, I had to pay for them. I have over on my bookshelf a stack of papers about this big that are all of my readings from the monitors and all of the reports from the C-section and the check-ins from the doctor and all of my updates. So it was in those papers that I discovered that they deemed that I had had a postpartum hemorrhage. And that's what had happened. It took me a long time because I was very hesitant to believe that that was what had happened. I thought for the longest time that something had gone wrong during the surgery, and how easy would it be for them to just explain away their mistake with a postpartum hemorrhage.
That's a mindfuck.
Yeah, it really was. So of course, there was no way I could prove otherwise, even if that's what had happened. So I had to kind of just accept that this was my story, and how can I process this and share my story to help myself heal and also to help others to find the positives in their traumatic birth stories, because it's so hard to do. People always want to share their traumatic birth stories they don't want to scare people, but they do, right? They're like, well, you went through that. Well, I went through so much worse with this and this and this, but I really didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go and say, well, I almost died and needed blood transfusions and all of this stuff, and it was terrible. I really wanted to see how I could turn that and turn it into a positive for my life, which I did, because it brought me into birth work, which is my absolute passion. And I get to help moms and families and babies in this transition and help them to find the joy, even if they do go through trauma, and hopefully prevent the trauma at the source. Because if you have the support, sometimes that can be avoided, because you do still feel like, even when you're not fully in control, you still feel like you are, because you know what's happening to your body, you know what your choices are, and you get the chance to have those discussions and make those decisions whenever you can.
Yes, and thank you for doing this very important work. There's not enough of us, and we are in we are in great need, and hopefully we can connect with more women who are ready to be on that journey and to stand in their power and to have someone guide them and walk beside them and provide them with resources and comfort and those coping skills, like you said, the beginning, where you're like, I thought it was just natural and I would cope, but then you were like in it and you can't stop the moving train, and you didn't have the mental coping skills to be like, okay, break is here, this is temporary, whatever it was to get you through.
Yeah.
So how did you, I'm curious about your process of processing the information.
Mhm.
And obviously that it seems like it was a bit of a shock, and then you had lots of questions. So you mentioned diving into a lot of research. Like, what did you do? So if someone were to be in the same situation as you, I guess, where they pay for their medical records, which is mind-blowing to me that we have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I did find out afterwards. Yeah, I
go
did
ahead.
find out afterwards that there's an app that you can get on your phone that actually has all of your medical records. You just have to go through a process of signing up for it. So I did find about that after.
You tell me, I feel like someone knows about this. If you know the app that you can download your medical records on, please pop it in the chat so that we can share it in this conversation, because I have heard of that
I
more
do have
recently.
it on my phone, but I can't remember exactly what it's called. And I'm using my phone right now for the chat, but I do have it there somewhere. It's called My Chart, I think, My Chart or something like that.
Something like that. Okay. Right.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. So I had to put in a bunch of information to get that stuff, but I did end up getting the records from that birth and from my son's birth through the app for free, which is lovely. But yeah, I feel like not everybody would want to go as into detail as I did. Like, there are lots of ways to process your trauma. The biggest one is talking about it. It's hard at first, but it gets easier every single time you do it. And it really helps. Like, I found every time I talked about it, a little piece of that trauma went away from me with me just speaking it. So I think that's my biggest piece of advice for anybody who's experiencing trauma. Even if you don't want to go on an Instagram live and talk about it, that's understandable. That's understandable. But talking to a professional or talking to a friend or talking to your partner, because that was a big thing that I thought about when I was dealing with my trauma from it. Was I asked him one day, how do you feel about everything that happened? Because I didn't, in that time, I didn't think about it. I was thinking about me and my baby. And I wasn't thinking about how difficult that must have been for him to not know what was happening with me and to be worried about both of us collectively and still have to be this strong, emotional being to hold us up and keep us going through it. So checking in with your partner is huge. I went through all of my records. I talked to doulas that I knew or medical professionals about what I saw, anything I had questions about. I tried to press issues that I had more to see what I could figure out, because of course I'm not a doctor, so I didn't understand everything that was in the records. So if I had questions, I brought those forward. And then I just bought books. I listened to podcasts. I just immersed myself in everything that was pregnancy and birth to kind of, I don't know, just remind myself that it was not my fault, that my body hadn't failed me, that these things happen, and it just was what it was. Like, I just had to move past it. Nothing that I was going to do was going to change what my experience was. And I had a healthy baby, which is not always the point. It's not always just like, you have a healthy baby, so you're good. But it is a good thing to remind yourself of. Her and I both came out of it on the other side. But yeah, it was a lot of processing, because then it was the decision of, do I want to try to have more children, or am I done, because that was a lot, and I have a kid now, and I don't want to be in that same situation again. You know what I mean? So it was a lot of work, but I mean, it took a couple of years of working and talking and researching. But if you really want to resolve the trauma, the resources are there, and you're eventually able to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Those are all really good options for people. And I think I really resonate with how I love to talk, but also how it helps it move out of your body. You know, like one of the ways that we can move some of this trapped stuff in our bodies out. And like, it's still part of you. It's still part of your journey. It shapes, like, it's very much shaped who you are now and how you move through the world, but it's not like weighing you down so that you're not able to thrive. You know, we have we're in a really interesting place collectively with how we work with our trauma. And even this idea of like being healed, you know, is there ever a fully healed thing, or are we just kind of like walking with it differently?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell us, if you feel like sharing, tell us, how did your partner feel in those moments?
He definitely felt scared, terrified, actually. Very unsure, because of course this was something he never thought that he would be experiencing either. And I mean, as much as you can prepare for these things, we didn't think that this was something that was going to happen. So already we weren't prepared for it. And really, until you're in the thick of it, you don't really know how you're going to handle that situation. He was extremely supportive. He was there with me through the surgery. He did say it really freaked him out when he saw a streak of blood like shoot up the divider. But he didn't pass out, so that's a plus. And he did the skin on skin with our daughter while I was in recovery. He knew that was something that was important to me, so he made sure that he did that for us, and he took good care of her. But yeah, he said it was really scary to have this newborn baby that he's trying to soothe and be there for, but he doesn't know what's going on with me. And when I'm going to be back, and when we're going to be together as a family unit, or if we are. So yeah, definitely it was definitely a scary time for him as well.
Absolutely. And I think we leave men out of these conversations too often, because in an emergency, they are the ones, dad's got to hold it down. And oftentimes as doulas, I don't know about you, but that's a lot of the work that I do is also with the partner, right? Supporting them and being part of the birthing process. I've been at a few C-section births where, dad and I were hanging out, waiting for mom anxiously to come back. And it was a lot of unpacking. Okay, this is what happened. Did you see this? You know, or just like distracting dad so that he could, you know, spend time with his baby and stay focused on that while we just had no idea what was happening in the adjacent room. So the big part of this journey for dads is also walking through that portal of fatherhood. And I'm sure he was probably like, oh, baby's going to come out one way or the other, and then mom will know what to do. And I'll support her in doing it. And then it was all on him.
Yeah, exactly. It was a lot for sure, but he's a fabulous dad. He did a great job. He has an older daughter from a previous relationship, so he had been in the birth room before, but of course it had gone a lot differently that time. So definitely surgery was not something that he was expecting or something that he had experienced before. So new for all of us, and of course it was an extreme situation. So
yes. Okay, so how was recovery? Do you want to talk to us about what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, for sure. As I said, I was a little bit queasy even watching the cartoon animation of what happened. So anytime I would feel the pain from down in my incision, or if I had to clean it or change bandages or anything like that, I immediately just felt like off. I just couldn't. It just made me think of what I had gone through and all of these different layers of muscle and tissue, and oh my goodness, it was a lot to deal with. And then just not being able to do what you'd expect to be able to do. Like I couldn't, if I wanted to go on a walk with my daughter, put her in the stroller, I had to get help. I couldn't pick up the car seat with her in it and put it in the stroller. I couldn't take it out. I couldn't do any of that. The only thing I could carry was her. So if I wanted to go out and take a little walk or go to the store to buy diapers, I had to have help in everything that I did. And then the recovery just took longer than I expected it to. Like just walking, just being able to walk. All I wanted to do was to be able to walk around our block. I remember going out one day and I was like, I just need to get out of the house. I'm just going to do a quick walk around the block. And it's like literally max a 5-minute walk if you're taking your time. And I remember it taking like 20 minutes to half an hour. And when I got back, I was in so much pain because I had just bitten off more than I could chew. And once I was halfway, you have to complete where you're going, right? So I think it's just maybe, of course, they prepare you. Well, you're going to want to stay in bed. You're going to want to do these things, but that's not always possible. Especially I find a lot of women are like, I need to be up. I need to be doing things. The house needs to be cleaned. I need to do the dishes. I need to do the laundry. I'm taking care of a baby, but I also need to do things. I need to cook dinner. Like it's all of this expectation that doesn't go away. You have this guilt for not being able to do anything. There's very few people I know that would be able to just lay in bed as you're supposed to and literally just rest and recover and do nothing else but that. So that's another place where doulas are amazing because they can do all of that stuff while you are recovering, and then you don't have to feel that guilt about, oh, I didn't clean and the laundry's piling up and the dishes are in the sink. Like, of course, I didn't want all of that to fall on my partner. So I think a lot of the time I pushed myself a little bit harder than I should have because I just had this, not that he was putting any expectation on me. I think I put it on myself. And I think a lot of women do that. They're like, well, I need to get all of this stuff done. I can't just sit here and take care of a baby. Like that's not enough, when really it's more than enough to just do that.
Absolutely. And these conversations and the work that we do will help to shift that narrative. I see it more and more in my mom group that there's more grace given for this time in motherhood. But I think immediately after birth, whether you've had major surgery or you just gave birth like vaginally and there were no interventions and it was easy peasy, rest and just spending that time solely with baby, bonding, eating well, drinking water. That's your job. Make it your job. Nothing else. But you're
well,
right.
That's what I was going to say. Even with my second birth with my son, which was unmedicated vaginal birth, that recovery was, maybe it was time that made it seem that way, but that recovery was just as difficult as my C-section because I couldn't walk properly. And like, I love that the idea is coming back that it does take a village. We're not meant to do this alone. Like you see other cultures where postpartum, they have family that are just like living there and they are doing all of the work so that the woman just recovers and spends time with baby. And it's beautiful. And I love that more and more it's seeping back in to like Canada and America, where we don't usually have that. It's usually just you're at home, you're with your partner, and you deal with it, and we'll come hold the baby.
Yeah, we'll get the cute snuggles in, and then we'll say bye.
Yeah.
And it's very self-led instead of community focused and family focused. And that's a huge gap, and we're trying to figure out our way back there to a place where we recognize and honor this time for what it is. And we try to build in supports and share with each other, you know, stories of doing it alone or stories of doing it with support, how much that changed your experience or whatever. Sometimes it's hard because you have nothing to compare it to, but we're hearing more stories. We're hearing this become more of a normalized experience. And that pressure is lifting a little bit from having to go and be the Stepford wife and have it all together and have the house spotless so that visitors can come over and tend to them instead of just resting with your baby. So yeah, it's shifting. It's we're helping it move there. Part of the movement. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that you had like a redemption birth. How did you feel in comparison? So like, do you feel like that birthing experience helped to heal this process with your first?
Yeah, I feel like it did help. I feel like I did a lot of preparation for my subsequent birth, which helped a lot. But even still, my mental game was not where it needed to be. I stress so much to people that being physically active and having all of those in place is very important, but mentally being strong throughout your labor is, in my opinion, the biggest thing. Because your head is going to play all kinds of tricks on you, telling you that you can't do it, that you can't handle it, that you're not doing it right, whatever the case may be. So it's really important to be mentally strong and practice whatever makes sense for you for practicing that, whether it's meditation or mindfulness or if you have affirmations, whatever that is. I remember all through that birth, including my 2 hours of pushing, thinking this is the same as my last birth. I'm going to get wheeled into the OR. This isn't working. They're going to have to take him out via C-section. Like, this is what's going to happen. So, which is so silly because that's not what happened at all. Everything went amazing. Everything was very natural. My water broke on its own. I didn't use any epidural. I didn't have laughing gas. I didn't do any of that stuff. I was able to switch positions. I did have to have continuous fetal monitoring because of my past experiences. But they set me up with a wireless monitor, and they put in an IV port so that if I did need anything, it was there, but they didn't have me hooked up to anything, which was lovely. And yeah, it was a very redeeming birth. I actually have, my partner took a video of when he was born, and I watch it very frequently because it's such an amazing thing to, like, any way that you birth is amazing. All women are warriors for however they give birth, whether it's via C-section or vaginally, or if you have an epidural or you don't. All of it is hard. All of it has its different challenges and its different rewards. But for me personally, going from wanting that natural vaginal birth and getting the exact opposite, and then going into this birth experience, just knowing so much more and really wanting to experience everything that labor had to offer. I wanted to experience the contractions, and I wanted to experience the ebbs and flows and how my body responded to these things. And just knowing that I was able to do that and go through that without any pain medication and birth my baby and be present was everything to me. I was with him right away. He was on my chest. We did breastfeeding. We got that golden hour, and that was so redeeming for me to have that. And I think back on it often. If things were different, I would have 10 more babies exactly that way, and just never stop. But of course, that's not how we're doing it. We're done. We're done now. But
Yeah.
it was a beautiful experience, and I couldn't have asked for anything more. So I'm really thankful.
Amazing. Yeah. I love they have that video that you get to like keep sitting with those feelings and keep like integrating it. And like we also see how the trauma does play in. Like it's not silly that you thought those things, right? Because you had that experience. So it's very like understandable that those thoughts would creep into your head and be part of this birth too. And I also love that we are also seeing a shift and a movement towards holding space for all kinds of people's experiences. Like it's not that natural birth is this pure must-have thing, and like in order to give birth you must have no interventions or it's not considered, you know, a worthy experience. And now we're holding more space for people that, you know, you are a fucking warrior for giving birth however it unfolded for you. And that even though we have the best laid plans, that things change and we're not always prepared to handle them, and things happen and things are out of our control. Birth is wild that way. But as women, we are working, I think, collectively on holding space for everybody's story and not being in competition, but being in that supportive role of saying like, no, you're a warrior, holy, you know, like, and I'm so glad that you also got that experience that you did. So I think that's a lovely thing that we're seeing happen. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us, Brittany, before we say goodbye?
No, I think we covered a lot of things, and I'm just thankful for this experience. And I love that you are doing this and getting different birth stories out there to really like let everybody know birth looks different. Like even for the same parents, different babies, it's going to be different. And like it kind of prepares you for parenthood, because you're saying like birth is different no matter what. Sometimes you have a plan and it doesn't go to plan and you just have to like improvise and like deal with what you've got while it's going on. It's kind of what happens when you have kids too, because sometimes they're crazy and they're not how you planned them to be, and they're just wild, and you just have to deal with it and just go with it.
Absolutely. I love that parallel. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad. And I'm sure we'll be chatting more in the future. So, yay! Tomorrow we have, tomorrow is Friday. Yes. Oh my God. I live moment by moment right now. Tomorrow, Carly's coming on to talk about HELP syndrome. And then one of my favorite people in the world, Leah, is coming to talk about letting go of expectations and also healing postpartum. So it's going to be a good chat. So we'll see everybody then.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye everyone.